easier to actually get to everybody and help everybody, so that's not so bad. Plus we're recording, so anybody who misses today's lecture is not really that far off anyways. All right, a couple of things. Last week we did the index page, so we basically took all of the users from our database and we displayed them in a wonderful table, and no, we didn't. You're shaking your head no. I thought we did get there. I'm pretty sure we did. Let's, why don't we boot up WAMP? And we'll make sure that that's where we got to. So just drop down into Cortana there and type in WAMP. I don't think we need audio. Lower the volume there. Could have sworn, Haiti, that we produced the index page. I've been playing well on my memory, though. We might not have. I'm just thinking we did. All right, once you have that up, go ahead. We're going to work in the same folder that we were working in last week. We're not going to change folders. So the link will be the exact same link that you had last week, which will be your lesson 4 link. So just navigate to localhost, localhost / comp-1006. That should drop you into the directory with your 4 folders. I have 12 folders, but you should have 4 folders. Go ahead and click on your lesson 4 folder, and it should take you to this page. Does that look exactly the same as mine? Cool, then we're on the right track. All right, next step. Let's click on Users, the link, and click View All Users. And you should have a table with all of the users. Yes, I see everybody else has one. Katie, do you have a table full of users? Okay.
No.
Well, we will figure out that in a second. Do you have a big error? You're actually not even navigating to localhost?
No.
No worries.
I think that's
Do you have WAMP running? There's only a little error down there. Okay, no, you need to run WAMP. So click in here and type WAMP.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. There you go. Start that thing up. And then give it a second to kick in. Yeah, click on that for a second. There it goes. Just don't close anything. Finish. Probably go orange before it goes green. Definitely taking its time. Once it goes green or orange, either way, get refresh. Don't open that again.
Oh, okay.
Click on your Chrome browser. Yeah, why is it? Are restarting all services? There it goes. It was going, and then we just restarted it. So just give it a second to boot back. It's just taking its time. There, it's green. Go ahead and refresh. There you go. Click on lesson 4. Nice. Click on users. And view all. You have keys. So it's good. No worries. All right, for the rest of you that just came in, basically we're just opening up our site in lesson 4, the same folder we were in last week, and we're just on the view users. Yeah. You have a comment or anything, that's fine. Just go to / users. So up there, just type. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's cool. But you're able to navigate to the site. Hit refresh. Just make sure everything's working together. Don't worry about it. We're not going to be working in the PHP and NIM folder anyway, so yeah, we're fine. All right, so you're just navigating to lesson 4 and /users. Just want to verify everybody's got the /users. So obviously the piece we're missing right now is the next step in our CRUD operations. CRUD usually takes 7 pieces altogether. Every single resource we create will have 7 pieces to it. And those 7 pieces, it's probably just best to make a list. There we go. And I'll zoom in a bit. And I'll collapse this sidebar. All right, so the 7 pieces are as follows. We have an index page, right? And our index page's purpose is so we can see all users or all of a resource. We're just using users as an example. So the index is the first piece of the puzzle. That allows us to see all of that resource inside that thing. You can liken it to like an index. You guys are probably all way too young, but way back they used to have like indexes, which you would go and everything you needed was in the index, and you could go read like for libraries and stuff like that, or Rolodex and stuff like that. It was all these big catalogs of things, and it was all of something. It was all of the library books. It was all of the contacts that you would have, right? So those were called indexes. So that's what this is. This is an index page which shows us literally all of our users that are in our database. If we had 10,000 users, this page would be 10,000 users long, right? It would probably crash, but we would have 10,000 users. The next page, and the one that we're going to build in a few minutes here, the next one is show. And show's purpose is to view one individual resource, just one resource that we've retrieved by some sort of unique piece of identification. So 99.9% of the time, the unique identification you will use to retrieve that one user is the ID, right? So you guys probably have learned so far that when you create a MySQL table, you can actually set primary key, and that primary key can auto-increment, right? And you use that as your unique identifier. Well, that allows us to do something like show so that we can actually go retrieve that unique record by its unique identifier. The next one in the list will be create. And create, obviously, sorry, actually the next one is new. It's not create, my apologies. It's new. And new is a view that allows us to create a resource. So the purpose of this is a form, right? So it's a form that allows you to be able to fill it out so you can create a resource. This is more like the portal part of it. It's just the view that the user sees. This isn't the actual code that takes those contents and then writes it to a database. That's another step. This is the first step. This is just the form that allows you to be able to enter in those details. The next step, which is create, we'll take those contents and writes them to the database. That's its purpose. So index will allow us to see all the users. Show allows us to see one unique user. New is a view that allows us to be able to create a new resource. Create is the action that actually takes that content and writes it to the database. Now we also have edit. And edit, just like new, is a view that allows us to modify a resource. So the idea of edit is that you would have the details of whatever resource it is. In this particular context, we're talking about users. You would have that user's details filled out in a form, and then you would be able to go change the details inside the form and then resubmit it. When you submit it, it needs to go somewhere, and the place it's going to go to is update. And update will be the action that commits the modification. So it will write those to the database. And last but not least is number 7. And 7 is interesting because it doesn't have a view. It doesn't have a dedicated view, but it still actually modifies the database. And that is destroy, which will remove a resource from the DB. So 7 files altogether, well, 7 main files altogether. We will, in our class, have an 8th file for every resource. That 8th file is just the form that we will use in both the new view and the edit view. Because the form is exactly the same for both views, it makes more sense to solve the problem of how you get the content into the form versus creating 2 exactly the same pages, right? Whole idea is to be dried. If you guys heard that expression before in coding, dry stands for don't repeat yourself. It's a very good mantra to follow. That's why we learn about functions. That's why we learn about methods and classes and stuff like that, so we don't repeat ourselves. All right? I'll do you a solid here. I'll copy this, throw it into the Slack channel. And there you go. It's just sitting in the Slack channel. That will definitely likely wind up on a test at some time. Cool. So we've done index. We're on week 4. We've done index so far. We still need to do show, new, create, edit, update, and destroy. That's where we need to get by the end of the semester entirely. Preferably we'll get much further. We also need to deal with the authentication strategy, but before we can do that, we have to at least get create done. So once we get to create, then we can actually build out the authentication, which I'm hoping, I mean, it might be optimistic thinking, but I'm hoping we get to create today. That would be ideal, and then we can do authentication. Not next week, because you guys are on Thanksgiving. Not the following week, because you're on reading week. So it'll be week 7 when you guys get back. We do authentication. Cool. Any questions about any of that? So this is not accidental. This is very common. While we're not going to learn MVC in this class because we don't have time in order to learn MVC, MVC follows this same pattern. It uses the same 7 types of files. They're even titled roughly the same way. So at least it will help you to understand what you're kind of looking for when you are in an MVC system. Cool. Are you still writing that down, Haiti? I did post it into Slack. Okay, cool. So today we're going to work on show. So index, like I said before, index was our way of being able to see all of our users, right? So we can see all of the users that we created. The next step is to see one user. Like I want to be able to see Elnora Pajak. Right? And the only way I'm going to be able to see Ellie is by actually creating a show view for her so that I can send her details over there. But it requires us to do a little bit of thinking about how we're actually going to do that. We need to be able to see Elnora and not accidentally see Donnie Mae, right? And the only way we can do that is by making sure that we use a unique identifier. Now we have 2 unique identifiers available to us that we can use. We have the one that we actually defined on the table, which is the ID column. The ID column is unique. If you were to look at our database Don't worry about opening it up yourselves. I'll just open it up for you to see. Why do I ever click on that button? It always takes me to this god-awful browser. All right, so if you look at this page, let's see if I can get zoomed in well enough. You'll notice that the ID column, each person has their own identity, right? They each have their own ID. And that's the same for you guys as students. You each have your own student numbers. Nobody has the exact same student number, and that's intentional because it's easier to match people up with a student number to their unique things than try to use a first and last name, especially when so many of you have either close enough to the same name or have identical names, right? So we could use email addresses because the way our system will work is you must have a unique email address in order to register. So the odds of you having the same email address as somebody else should be virtually impossible. But the thing is the numbers, because we are creating these numbers, because we are incrementing these numbers, it makes it absolutely impossible for two users to have the same ID. There's no way for two users to have the same ID. So, like I said, 99.9% of the time when you're looking for a unique identifier, you're going to use the ID number that shows up, that gets auto-incremented and auto-assigned by MySQL. All right? So let's create our show page. I'll even save this and put it up for you guys as well. My computer today seems to be super, super slow for some reason, and I'm not sure why. There, I'll just put it as a text file. I'll upload that later for you. All right. We're going to create show. Now, I've already created some of the files for you, right? You'll recognize them already. There's create, index, new, and show, right, that are already there for us. There's also an underscore form.php. That will be a file that we will use across two different views as an includes. And then you'll also see that we have the create.php, which will be an action. Now you'll notice that we're missing edit, update, and destroy. Those three will create at a later date, probably after we complete authentication. Then we'll do create, edit, and destroy. Or sorry, update, edit, and destroy. So if you open up the show.php that is under users, it's going to have a bunch of stuff already in the file for us. And I'm just going to collapse my sidebar so that we can see it. And it says, step 1, get the user by the ID. Okay, so there's a few different ways that we can pass information from page to page. But one of the most common ways is through the URL using something called query parameters. What a query parameter is it's a key and a value that we add to the URL that then gets passed on to the next location that it's going to. And then that location has access to that query parameter. It's called the query message. It has access to that message, and it can pull it down and actually grab the value in it. So this is kind of a cool but very easy way for us to be able to say, like, pass a value or a variable to the next location. And the reason why that's important is because the web is absolutely stateless. When you are in one page and then you make a request to the next page, any variables or anything you defined on this page stop existing the second you make it to the next page. They don't carry over. And the reason that is because the web is stateless. It's for your own protection, actually. So what happens is your browser will not maintain that information from state to state. This becomes more of an issue when you're working in JavaScript than it does in PHP, because PHP is server-side. We control state. So we can control state on the back end and actually control how we pass values back and forth, but we still have to abide by the laws and rules of the stateless internet. So when we go to pass values back and forth, we have to use, it's not hacks or trickery, but we have to take advantage of sessions, and we have to take advantage of the post body and the get bodies in order for us to get back and forth. So before we get into, actually we probably should talk about superglobals before we move into this, but why don't we actually just type in the code part first. So we're going to pull the identifier from the URL, but we haven't seen what the URL is going to look like. I'm going to actually remove all of these comments because I can't stand all of the comments in the page. They block my view. All right. So the URL is going to look something like this. It will be our local host. It'll be users show.php. There'll be a question mark to signify that we have a key value pair. We're going to use the key ID, and we're going to make it equal to whatever number happens to be there. So we'll say 1, for example. So that's what the URL is going to look like when we actually retrieve it. And everything after this question mark is completely ignored by the browser, except for the fact that it grabs it and turns it into a message body, but that's our server that's going to be taking care of that. So our server is going to take this ID equals 1 and turn it into a key and a value. And then it's going to store it in a super global variable. It sounds like a superhero, but it's not, right? It's a super global variable. This super global variable that gives us access to this is called get. So we're going to actually assign that. We'll call it user ID. And we'll access our super global variable called get. And we'll pass it the key. The key that we type in here is the same key that's in the URL query string. So ID, like so. So what will happen is the information we type in this URL, after this point, this key is now accessible through the get. If you added another value to the end of that, it would also be accessible through the get. I think the best thing we could do is actually show that so that you can see what is happening. Why don't we navigate to show? We'll just type it in raw inside our database, or inside our file here. So right now we're on users. I'm just going to go to show.php and hit enter. Right off the bat, we're going to get an error saying undefined index ID on line 6. And that's because we're trying to access the ID key that we haven't set, right? So we can go ahead and set that now. Up on the address bar, type in a question mark. That signifies that you're about to type in a key value pair, okay? The key is going to be ID. So we'll type in ID, and I apologize, I can't make the address bar bigger. And then equals, and then just a number. And it really doesn't matter right now what number we put in there. I'm just going to use 1. So it's show.php. I'll write down on the blackboard with this ridiculously oversized piece of chalk. So it's show.php question mark ID equals 1. This is our key. This is our value. I'll make that look more like a 1. So if we want to see that value and actually spit it out, right now we have errors. Just ignore the errors. If we go back to our IDE, we can actually spit out the value of user ID. How do I spit something out to the page? How do I output this value to the page? We've been doing it for the last 4 weeks. It starts with E. Yep, echo. Somebody said eco. I like eco. Eco sounds like a cool word. User ID. So that will echo out to the actual screen. We should be able to see that on the screen. So go ahead and Alt-Tab back to your browser. Hit Control-R. And it's likely buried somewhere. That's why we can't see it. Oh, no, I see it. It's up in the very top corner. Kind of hard to see, but it's up there. Very, very top corner, you should see a number. Now, if you wanted to change that number, all you have to do is go up here. I'm going to type in a long number and hit enter. And now you can see my long number is up there. So get is just one of the superglobals that we have. There's a whole bunch of them. Some are for transferring data back and forth. Some provide us information, right? That is kind of crucial to what we want to do. There's one called server, which provides us a whole bunch of information. There's the other two superglobals. There's cookie, there's globals, there's a few of them. And we'll actually cover most of those when we're going through class. Okay, cool. So we have our get. Now we actually need to perform some logic here in order to go get the user so that we can display the user's details. So why don't we just comment out, we'll just comment this one out. So I hit control / when I do that, by the way. First step is to write our SQL statement to actually go grab the user. Now it's super important that we pay attention to the fact that we are parsing information that the user is putting into the URL. Because we're grabbing that, we need to be careful. We need to protect ourselves, right? We don't want to just take whatever random thing they type in that URL and shove it into our MySQL call, because they could potentially wipe out our database, or they could grab all of our users, they could grab all of our passwords, they can do a lot of malicious things. So we want to make sure we separate their value and basically tell MySQL, this is a value. This is not a MySQL parsing thing. This is a value. Treat it as a value. Do not treat it any other way. So the way we do that is the exact same way that we did it last week in the index file. First, we'll write our SQL statement. And this part should be easy. We're going to select one user. So we're going to select star from users. And then to refine my search so that I only get the one record, I'm going to say where, right? So where says this is a conditional clause, right? Where ID equals a placeholder called ID. And if I want to make it super, super refined, right? I mean, it is impossible for there to be more than one user with that identifier in the database. But if I've done something and I've messed up, maybe there's a possibility there could be two. We can actually refine it so it only retrieves one record and no more than one record. And we do that by adding limit 1 to the end of it. And limit 1 will basically say, I'll only return back one record. Now, this becomes super cool when we start doing things like pagination. Remember how I said you can list all 10,000 users, but your page will likely crash, right? Because it's just too much information in the browser. So usually what you do is you paginate that information by pulling out like 20 at a time, right? So you do 20 and then you create some links to go grab the next 20 and then the next 20. And limit obviously becomes a huge part of that because limit allows us to say, you know, only pull 20 records back. Don't pull more than 20. And then we can also use that in conjunction with something called offset. Offset tells us where to start. So we can say offset to here, now only pull 20, right? All right, so this is just a sentence. That's all it is. My IDE is kind of nice, and it likes to highlight it, so I get some nice syntax highlighting, so it looks a little bit like SQL, but at the end of the day, it is just a string. Has no meaning whatsoever. So our first piece, we need to grab our connection, right? Connection is so important. We already have it. Our connection actually comes from this include script that we added, well, that I added for you that we did last week. Same include script. Remember when we wrote connect.php? So that's where that's coming from. And you'll remember from last week when I was explaining how includes works, includes literally copies the contents of a file and pastes it directly in place. That is literally what it does. So if you have variables defined in that file, they are now accessible in this file because it's just copied all the content and dumped it right in. That's going to lead to something future in the class here that we're going to have to talk about variable variable discrepancies, which is where you have a variable and then you accidentally overwrite it, and now your whole application breaks. And that can come in common with includes, because we're including variable declarations in here, and we can accidentally overwrite them because we can't see them, right? Because they're in another file. So we have to be cautious about that, and there's ways around that. But for now, we're just going to party on, go right into it. So the first thing we want to do is actually create a variable to hold our statement. And we're going to prepare it by going into con, skinny arrow, prepare, and we'll pass it the SQL. And then that will prepare our statement for us. So the importance of this is that prepare basically takes this statement, finds the bound parameters, and understands that it needs a bound parameter to be filled in order to execute this statement. The other thing it does is it takes this statement and says, that's your SQL. This is your SQL statement. So anything that's a placeholder, like :ID, will not get parsed as SQL commands. It will only get parsed as SQL values. That's super important, because if somebody was to instead type a semicolon here, like in their browser, they typed a semicolon, and then they said drop database, right? That would be bad, because now the whole database would get dropped because we parsed that. We don't want that to happen. So the way we stop it is by using bound parameters. Bound parameters stop stuff like that from happening. So the next step, let's bind the parameter. Otherwise, it's going to blow up and yell at us. Statement, bind param. We're going to give it, the first thing is the key, like the placeholder. So that's :ID, that comes from our SQL statement where we defined it, right? :ID. Next is the actual value. Well, the value will be $user_ID. And then last but not least is the actual verification. This is a validator and a sanitizer from what I understand. It goes in like PDO : : and then the data type, param int. And what it's supposed to do, from what I grasp, cast it to an integer and then verify it's an integer. So if it's a word, obviously that's not an integer, and it will blow up and tell us there's a problem, right? Whereas if it's a number, it should go through just fine. And then last but not least, we're ready to store the user. Oh, sorry, no, we actually need to execute. So we need to do statement execute. This will actually fire off the command with the bound parameter off to MySQL to execute. And MySQL will execute it. Then we're ready to add our users. So last week, when we went to grab all the records and store them, we used a command called fetch all, which literally fetched all of the records. We could use fetch all here. That's entirely okay. But the problem is our record's going to come back nested in an array, which means we would have to iterate through the array to get it out, right? Or we would have to reference its first index, which would be 0. It's just a lot of pointless work for no reason. If we only have one record, we only need that one record. We might as well be able to work with it immediately. So the way we can do that, we'll do statement, and instead of fetch all, we do just fetch. And what fetch will do is it will give you back the last record as only the record itself. So generally, records are returned when we use fetch all in a nested array. Like so. Fetch will only grab the record directly and pull it back. When we get the record back, the way it's set up is that it's a hash, and it has, instead of indices, like an array would have, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, its keys are actually the column names in our database. So that's how we can actually go through and pull each of the users out, which is what we had looked at last week when we did the index page. But based on the confusion on your faces, I feel like that week didn't happen. And maybe some reason we all have code. I don't know, maybe we were all abducted at the same time. Just a mass abduction. All right, let's go back to the page and see if anything is working. Cool? We have stuff. We just don't have a user. And the reason we don't have a user is because user 176.876.876 does not exist. Let's try to see if we can find a user that exists. I know I have a user 10, so I'll change that number to 10. And there we go. There's Eleanor. Or Elnora. Cute. It's a nice avatar. So that's her picture, and I can access another user by just changing the number. Increment it up 1 or 2, right? Yours might be at 10 or it might be at 1. Try 1, try 10. Just do like increments of 10 to see. Or go to your users table in PHP my admin and go find out what the ID is and then type that in. Or, even better than that, why don't we make a link, right? That would make more sense. Why don't we link to these users? And we can link directly from the index file, because that makes the most amount of sense, right? And then we'll just link to this page, and then we don't have to do anything with the URL at all, because the page will take care of it for us. That makes a lot more sense to me. So why don't we do that? Jump back to your IDE, and open up usersindex.php. This is the one that we were working on last week. So that's users.php. And if you scroll down a little, you'll find this is where we did our connection. You can see where we did the fetch all, right? So your show page is actually showing you an error. So that's because if you scroll out, we wrote users. All right, so in index, you can see where we did a fetch all, right? And that fetch all would have retrieved back this whole block, right? The array with each of the records. And then further down, we iterated. Iterated means we went through a loop, right? We went through a loop down here. Just after that in our T-body here, on line 53, we did a loop and we iterated through each of the users, passed them to an alias variable called user, and then we referenced them in here. So now the thing is each of the users that comes back, they have more information than what we're just displaying here. Like there's their role, there's their avatar. Those fields are still there. They're still in that user hash. And so is the ID. We can access that information to build a nice, unique URL to our show page, right? So why don't we do that? I think we'll just wrap the first name and make it a link that points to the actual show page. I figure that works, right? So let's first, on line 56, just above this user's first name and last name, we're going to create an anchor link, right? You guys know how to create anchor links. You've created anchor links before. It's just a simple A tag. And I'm going to put the closing A tag on the bottom. And then I'll tab this in. So there we go. I have an anchor tag. And an anchor tag has a common attribute called href, right? And the href is where we need to go. It's our location. It's our target, right? And so our target in this scenario is going to be that show page. Now we should definitely use those constant paths that we defined last week so that we're guaranteed to start from the root and work our way in. So we'll add that constant path, which was called base path. We'll add that in first. Now we can just navigate as if we were just navigating using relative paths. Now we can go /users, right, to get to the users directory. Like so. That takes us into the users directory. Our next step is to get to the show file. So that would be /show.php. And I'm not hitting enter, this is wrapping. So you know. And now that I've got show PHP, that will navigate to the show page, but I need to give it that query string, right, that we were talking about before. What's the character I use to define that I'm passing in a query string? What's the character? The first character I need after show.php. Question mark, right? Question mark, and that says, hey, the next things that follow this are a query string. Please evaluate them. So query strings are made up of keys and values. Keys and values. So the first key is ID, and the value is, and this is where we get dynamic. We don't want to hard code the value in. We want it dynamically generated. And we can do that easily by just taking a look at the user record and pulling the user's ID out because it will guarantee to be unique, right? So let's add in some inline PHP, reference $user, and pull their ID. So once again, our href, we pass in the base path, which starts off at localhost comp1006 lesson 4. It's as if we just chunked that right in there. Then we go to users, right, where our show page actually exists. We access the show page. We pass in a question mark, which signifies that we want to add a query string. And then we add in the key and then the value. Anybody still typing that out? Yeah, I'll give you a couple seconds. Get some water in me. You have an error? All right, now we're ready to jump over to the browser. Hit Control R. Nope, sorry. Let's navigate to the users page. View all users. And step 1, if we did correct, should be blue, meaning that we added an anchor tag around it. If we hover over it, down in the very bottom left-hand corner, you should see the URL. And if you did it correctly, you should see ID equals and a number. And each one that you hover over should be a different number. They should not be the same number, right? And now, when you click on one of these, it should take you to the show.php page, and you should see the user. I also provided a handy little backlink, so you can go back to the users page if you want to, and click on a new one to show that user. See? These avatars, these crazy pictures that you see here, I'm generating those for you on the fly by using a API called Adorable Avatar, and it creates these based on the email address. It actually created them based on any string you gave it, but they're always unique, so everybody should have a different one. So when we create ourselves today, we should have a unique face for ours, ideally. Yes, Lavish? You have errors? Okay. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? And anybody with errors, I'll gladly help. Before we do that, does anybody have any questions about the stuff we just learned? Yes? Errors? Yeah. Okay. Does anybody have any questions that are not an error?
Can you explain bind parameter?
Sorry, explain what?
The bind parameter?
The bind parameter? Yep. So the purpose of the bind parameter, let's jump to the show page here. This value that you see right here is a placeholder. And the reason why we put a placeholder in is because we don't want to just take raw information from the user and put it right inside our SQL string. Because if I'm a malicious user, what I can do I can write that into it and now drop your data. right? So we want to be able to sanitize what they're giving us and make sure it's what is supposed to be there. So the way we do that is we use a bound parameter, which is like a placeholder. It's like, this is just holding this place for right now.
Why did we use that like
The colon? The colon signifies that it's a bound parameter. So if you didn't use a colon and you just typed in ID, SQL would blow up because it would try to find an ID equal to ID, literally.
and in the line parameter, line not
This one here. So in the bind parameter, this is this. These are the two same things. So what bind parameter does is it will parse through the SQL statement, look for this key that you define, which it's going to find it right there. It's going to take this value that you define. It's going to sanitize and verify that it is an integer, and then it's going to put it in, plug it in. Then when we call execute, it will execute the complete statement with the parameter already bound in. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then now you can do fetch, which will take the result from that and store it. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so what prepare does is it takes this statement and it basically, it does a couple of things. One, it tells the PDO engine that we have a parameter that we found. So it will be looking for it. If we forget to bind to it, it will throw an error and tell us that we didn't find the parameter that we said we were going to, right? So that's one thing it does. The other thing it does is it protects our statement. So it takes this SQL, right, and it basically makes it a protected SQL statement, meaning that any bound parameters that get added on cannot be SQL commands. So you couldn't change this to drop ID or drop database and plug it in. It wouldn't execute. It would get treated as a literal value. You know that word, literal? Means as is. Like what you see is what you get. So it would be treated as a literal string and plugged right in as a literal string, which doesn't have any meaning. If it's encoded characters, then it has no meaning whatsoever. So prepare is super important because it helps protect our statement. And then executes the whole statement. Yeah.
Did we still need to drop it out?
Do we need to drop the database? No, we don't need to drop the database. We don't want the database. Drop database means delete my database. Remove it entirely.
So like you cut the connection, like okay, if we were using different tables, so we would like use some of like user.
Yeah, so if you're using a different table, you would do the same thing, but connect to a different table. Same database, though.
And if we need to use a different database,
If you need to use a different database,
multiple databases in the same code.
sorry, multiple tables in the same database or multiple databases,
databases in the same code.
then you'll need multiple connectors so that you can connect onto multiple databases.
So do we need that just one connection or something?
No, actually you don't. You can actually store all of those as concurrent connections. So in your connect, you would create this script, right? But you would create, either you would do it better than what we've done here as a class, where you can create multiple connections, just give it different information, and then it would give you a connection, and then you just store that. So you would have, like for example, G-Shift, our system, we have 5 databases that we connect to, 5 different databases, and all 5 databases obviously live in different places, right? On AWS, in Amazon. So we have multiple connections. We connect to all 5 at roughly the same time. So we're always constantly connecting to all 5 databases. So that's totally fine, you can do that. The trick comes into just keeping your database connections managed. That's all. The other thing too to note, MySQL, when you're working with MySQL, you connect and then you get out of there as soon as possible because you only have a set number of connections that you're allowed. So if you have a high traffic website, you don't want people connected to the MySQL for their whole time that they're there. You want them to connect, perform whatever it is they're doing, and close. That's why we use what? Caching is helpful. I know what you're talking about. Caching can be helpful if I'm accessing the same data as they are accessing, and there's no reason for me to connect. It would make more sense for me to access a cache file and load into the cache data, right, instead of connecting to MySQL. But yes, caching is utilized for that purpose. But if it's unique data to me, and it's the first time I've ever requested it, I want to make sure that I connect, I'll cache the response likely, and then disconnect them. That way if they access again, they're not connecting again. Because I only have, at the base level for an unmodified instance of MySQL, you get 20 connections, which means you can have 20 people simultaneously connecting to the database. That's it. Any more than 20, and a person will have to wait, or they'll time out. So that's why you, with MySQL or Postgres, you get in, you get out as fast as possible. It's different when you start working with something like Mongo, because Mongo allows unlimited connections. Everybody can connect. And you actually maintain your connection. You don't ever lose it. It stays for the whole cycle of your time in the application. So it's a little different. All right, I'm going to, Yep, no worries. I'm going to help with errors. Is it errors? Okay, just 1 second. Sorry? Yes, I can. Let me pause. All right, we're going to talk about superglobals, and we're also going to talk about scope. Can't remember which one is first. I think superglobals is first. Yes, superglobals are first. So Blackboard is down. So I'll just load this up and go with it. I don't know if it's still down, but it was down. Gracias. All right. Creating our partials, index and show. There's show, all done. Superglobals and why we need them. So PHP gives us some ways to handle some issues with state. Remember I was telling you that if I define a variable on one side on one page and then carry it to the next page, I don't have access to that variable. And I can show you that. Here's Google. There we go. Here's my sidebar. This is a console where I can type JavaScript in. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to define a variable in here for you. Okay? We're gonna call this let. Actually, you know what? We'll make it global. Super global, right? We'll just do name equal to Sean McKinnon. Bam. I have a variable. This is my variable. Don't worry about typing this out. Don't type this out. So I can access it in this page. Name, Sean McKinnon. Totally accessible. However, it's only accessible while I'm on this page. The second I navigate from this page, I lose that variable because the browser is stateless. Let's jump to images for a second. Okay, so here I am in images, still Google's website. I'll try name. Enter, Sean McKinnon. What the hell? That shouldn't work. Shouldn't maintain that. Google's doing some funky stuff. Let me switch to my lesson plan builder then. There we go. Now I'm in my lesson plan builder. Name. What is happening? That is not supposed to do that. There is no such thing as that. That's interesting. Oh, because it's in the console. That's my fault. It's in the console. And the console is actually persistent. So that's kind of a crappy way to show that. What would be a good way to show that? Not an easy way. That's super annoying. All right, why don't we try it a different way? Let's try creating a new page. I'm going to create a brand new page here. I'm going to call it vars don't, can't put that in there, persist.php. Okay, so here's my vars don't persist.php page. And in here, I'm going to type in a new variable, okay? So $name equals Sean McKinnon. There's my new variable. All right, and while I'm at it, I might as well create a link. So I'll just create an A tag with a href equals, let's just go to index.php. Click. And I'll echo out $name in here. So there we go. I've defined a variable. I'm echoing it out. And then I've created myself a link. And what's going to happen is I'm going to click this link. I'm going to go to another page. And then I'm going to try to access this variable from that page. So I'm going to index. Going to my root index here. So you know what? I'll just do it right under here. Here we go. Echo $name. Now this is what I'm saying is that the browser is entirely stateless. So I'm going to go to, what did I call that stupid page? Vars don't persist. .php. Cool. So here's my page, right? I have my variable. We can see that my variable is working because it's been defined. Now, unless Google is doing some craziness in the background, when I click this, my variable is going to stop existing because it only lasts for the lifespan of this page. The second I change pages, it's gone. It's dead. It doesn't exist anymore. So I can see that the second I hit click. Kablooey! Right? Because the variable doesn't exist. There is no variable name. And that's because I can't keep my variable between pages. So then that leads to the possible question when we talk about authentication. How do I know the user is logged in? I can't store that the user is logged in a variable and expect it to persist from page to page, because it won't. The browser is stateless. The second I change pages, kablooey, right? I can't be like, hey, dude, you still logged in? I suppose I can make them log in at the top of every single page. Wouldn't my page be popular? Right? But obviously you can see that doesn't make sense either. And based on the fact that you don't have to do that in Facebook, you don't have to do that in Amazon, you don't have to do that in eBay, there must be something they're doing that we can also do. I mean, Facebook is PHP. It's run entirely on PHP and React. So based on that, we must be able to do the same thing they're doing in order to persist data. And there is. There's this wonderful thing called Superglobals. And Superglobals are cool. We might have different opinions of what's cool or not, but I find Superglobals cool. There's a whole bunch of them. 2 Superglobals that we will use quite often, especially when we are basically trying to grab a unique user or we're trying to write form data. Those 2 are going to require us to use these 2 wonderful superglobals, get and post. Now, get and post are interesting because they live for one life cycle. You get one life cycle from them. You get to go from page A, where you define, right? So I have ID equals 1. Okay, that's on page A. And I get to travel with my data to page B. And I can access, I can access that and it will say 1, right? Everything's good until I navigate again, until I go to page C. When I get to page C, this thing stops existing. It dies. It only lives for one life cycle. Same with post. Post, same deal. I will get post from here where I submit my form, right? Here's my form and my button. Right, there's my submit button, and I submit. Woohoo! Off it goes to post, and now I can process this on that page. But after that point, and I try to get back to C, and stops existing. Lives for one life cycle. That's it. You get one round trip. That's all. So, get and post. Will they work for our user? They could. We could literally set post for every single one and send a post request on every single transmission. But here's the problem with that. Get and post are not secure. And the way they work is they actually attach it to the message body of the request. which means any data that we send is visible in the browser through the network tab. Which means if you were to do a post, for example, and you were logged in on a site, and some malicious little bugger walked up to your computer and was like, cool, I'll just check the network tab. Awesome, here's your user details. Now I know your user ID. I know your email address that you use to connect with. I know when you logged in and whatever other data they attach to it. That's not good, right? That's bad. So, or the man-in-the-middle attacks. Those can be bad as well. So we have another way around that we can use. And this is super important because this is a lifeline, but I find that people abuse this one, is session. So when you, any website you go to, doesn't matter what website you go to, it will create this thing called a session. And the session is unique to you. So you will have a session, and Lavish will have a session. It's like Oprah in here. You'll have a session. You'll have a session. Everybody will have a session. And it's all unique, and that's important because I can take your session and I can add information to it that's unique to you. So if you log in, I can actually write to your session and say, yes, you've been authenticated. Here are your user details. Here's your session key. Now I can use those to validate you. And that will persist till you close your browser. Once you close your browser, it's dead. Dies in the water the second you close your browser. But for the length of the time that you're on my site with your browser open, I can persist your session. Which means I can feed in all the data I want and be able to transfer that from request to request to request to request, right? So down here I have an example of that. I'll zoom in a little bit. So you can see here, I start my session. This actually starts or resumes the session, right? So when you go to the page, every page you navigate in PHP creates a new session. Then you navigate away, it destroys that session, creates a new session, it just keeps doing that until we decide to start keeping one around. The second we do session start, it now keeps that session. And that is ours. We've landlocked it. That is ours. We're using that from here on in. Once I do that, I can then assign values to my session. First, I reference the global variable, the super global, known as $_session. Then I just give it a key, whatever key I want to store the value in. It's usually a good idea to use your own unique keys because there are values in session already that you don't want to override. But for the most part, you never will. So I create my key, first name, and then I give it a value of Sean. And that will now persist from point to point. Let me demonstrate. So here's my vars don't persist. I'm going to add a session start at the top of it. Then I'm going to take this. I'm going to access the super global called session. Like so. And then I'm just going to echo that out, just like we did on the original page. I'll close this on the side so you can see what I'm doing. Don't worry about following along with this because we're going to write one out anyways. So here we go. I've got my session start. I've created my session name. I've added Sean McKinnon as the value, and I'm echoing it out. The difference between this and the variable we created the last time is that this will persist till I close my browser. Once I close my browser, all those values will disappear, right? They'll be completely gone. So now if I jump over to my index page where I'm trying to echo out name, I can go ahead and actually echo out the $session. However, that session start, we always have to call that. We can never not call it. It always has to be called in order for us to be able to access session variables. So that's fine. We'll just change the format of how we wrote this. Here we go. So I'll do a session start, so it resumes the session. And now I can echo $_session name, which will say Sean. So I'll prove that. Jump over to the browser. Let's go back a page. Hit refresh. Looks exactly the same. Still says Sean McKinnon. Nothing's changed. I'll click, and you'll notice we still have Sean McKinnon. And that's because the session variable is accessible from every single page, from the whole website until I close the browser. Sessions are awesome. Sessions are very good. We need to be smart about sessions, though. People have a bad form of taking session variables. This is very common for new PHP programmers. Their user logs in. They decide they're going to store their user in the session so that they can keep track of the user and that they're logged in, but they store the user's password in as well. Sessions are not foolproof. They can be hacked. There's something known as a man-in-the-middle attack, which is where somebody actually hijacks your session and becomes you, as if they were you in the middle of that process. So think about it. You're using Amazon, you're loading stuff into your cart, and somebody hijacks your session in the middle. They dump in $20,000 worth of goods and hit checkout. Stuff like that happens all the time, unfortunately. Not so much with Amazon, but with smaller, commercial sites, right? So sessions you got to be careful with. You don't want to store all the information for the user in there because somebody could potentially access that information. So what you do instead, usually when you store the user, you store in the bare minimum of what you need, right? Just absolutely the bare minimum of what you need. We're going to store their email address, their ID, basically everything except for the password. We won't store the password. All right. Any questions about any of that? We're going to do it too, so don't worry about it if you don't totally fully understand it. Yes?
So why do you use section and not getting post? Why does it just getting post if session is what?
So
It's better.
part of the issue that we have...
When you use one or the other.
Right. No, that's a very valid question. So part of the issue is that get and post are used natively by the browser anyways, right? So when we actually go to write something in, like when we did show, for example, so if I go to the index page, right, and I click on this, this value that's up here is only accessible using get. Because what happens is PHP comes along with its little bit of magic. It extracts ID and immediately creates the superglobal get and adds it as a key. When we submit a form, same thing occurs. It takes the form values, immediately assigns them to post. So unfortunately, you have to use either get or post. There is a third option. It's called request. Request does not distinguish between get or post. Request literally just has those keys and values in it. It's not get or post. A lot of people avoid using it, though, because they want to be very sure about the data they're parsing. The problem with using request is that you don't know if the person posted the information or they shoved a whole bunch of query strings up in the URL. It's better for you to know where it came from, right? Because one is the difference between submitting a form. The other one can just be an AJAX call using JavaScript. So you need to be a little cautious. So yeah, so session is more for you as the developer. Get and post is more for the user's way to communicate with you. That's the easiest way to think of it. There's also others. I don't know if I wrote them down. No, I didn't write them down. There's also cookie. Cookie's a little bit different. Like, here's for cookie, right? Cookie is basically like a little piece of data that you get to keep on the person's computer. It's a little chunk of memory that exists on their computer. And you can write to it, and you can be like, cool, here's my name. And I'm going to store that on your computer. And you've seen this. You may not realize it, but you've seen it. You know when you click the Remember Me button, right? How that works is it stores a little key on your computer and says this person has logged in, basically. The next time you access the site, instead of you having to go through the full authentication process, it takes your key, it takes your IP address, and it validates you. And as long as your IP address and your key match what is currently stored in as the remembered password and logins, then it will come back and give you access again. If one of those two does not match, then it will make you log in again, right? That's how come when you access Facebook from home, you're logged in and everything is good, and then you access Facebook from school and you have to re-log in, right? But the next time you don't. And then if you access Facebook from the public library, same thing, you got to log in again. It's because it detects that you're in a different location each time. And so therefore the two pieces don't match. The way they do that is they're storing those in a little chunk of memory on your computer known as cookies. And cookies are cool. However, cookies are unreliable. They're unreliable state because the problem with cookies is a user can see them and a user can remove them. They don't have to keep them around. In fact, all they have to do to see them is go to this wonderful thing that we keep going to. They click these double arrows. They come down to where it says application. And they can see what local storage you have stored, what session storage, but that's not the session storage like the session that we're using. It's a different storage. And cookies. And so your cookies will actually show up in here. I already have one by the looks of it. I have a cookie called teacher for some reason. Teacher, assistant, app, session. Actually, it's storing the session ID inside that cookie. It's doing that because I'm using Ruby on Rails for this application, and it does that for verification. So that every single page I go to, it verifies that with the actual session ID to make sure I'm not hacking. But anyways, I can access cookies. And because I can access cookies, I can delete cookies, which means I can remove the cookie, which means the data you put on my computer is now gone. And there's also there's cookie blockers that you can download for your computer that you can put inside your browser and have the worst internet experience you've ever had in your life, but you can do it. And basically what it does is it blocks cookies so that there's no chance of people writing to the cookie data because it just blocks it, right? So because of those things existing, cookies are not reliable, so we don't use them. We only use them for convenience. When we want to give the user convenience of remember me. Is remember me required for our application to work? No, it's just convenience, right? So we don't care. If they want to block cookies, that's their problem. That's their crappy internet experience, not ours. So that's all of the actual pieces for that, for the superglobals. So we're actually going to use superglobals in a couple of different ways. We're not just going to use it for authentication. We're also going to use it to create something called a flash notification system. What flash notification is it's our way of being able to say something on the server side happened and it was good, or something on the server side happened and it was bad, right? And we can actually tell the user that in a nice, friendly manner, right? So we use flash notification for that, which allows us to take a message and pass that message on to the user. The reason why we can't use get or post in this scenario is because of that whole request cycle thing. We lose. Who?
Sorry, Don Nobby. He's parked in a handicap parking spot. I just found a license plate. Sorry, guys.
No. Where the fuck was I? So anyways, we're not going to use get or post for that. We're going to use session to store it because if they cycle to a different page and it's an entirely new request, we'll lose the data that we have. We need to make sure the data persists to the next page. So that way, even if they go into the browser and type in a brand new URL that's on our site though, brand new URL, they will get that error message or get that success message because we'll make sure it's attached to the session. So we're going to do that. When are we going to do that? We're not doing that for a while. That seems goofy. Why did I do that? Oh, because we do that a lot later. Okay. But it is important that we understand superglobals because that's going to help us with the next steps of authentication and creating users. So another little lecture piece. Let's talk about authentication strategies. So the authentication that we're going to roll out inside our system is called role-based authentication. So what that basically means is that instead of having one level of authentication, we can have multiple levels, right? So kind of like when you go to Costco and you can get the membership card, right? And there's like the basic membership, and you get so much stuff for that basic membership. Or you can go to the gold tier, right? The gold tier is pretty cool because it's a gold card. And now you have a little higher membership, right? And you get better things, more discounts, better cashback, stuff like that. Or you can go to the executive tier, right? The nice, wonderful executive tier at Costco. Yes, I have it. You get a black card, right? It's got gold. It's got your picture on the back of it, right? It's Real sexy looking card. You get 2.5% cash back with that one. Yeah, so that's the next level of membership, right? Same idea with role-based authentication, same kind of idea. It's these multi-tiered that basically puts gates in front of certain accessible areas that you only want certain levels to be able to access, which makes perfect sense. So for example, we're going to make a comment system where when you add a piece of content, somebody can make a comment. To stop bots, like computer robots basically going in and adding spam and Viagra commercials into your comment box, we're going to force people to register with your site. So the only people that are allowed to comment are registered users, right? However, we don't want registered users to be able to add new content. That needs to be reserved for you. You're an administrator user. So if you look at the little picture, I don't know how many of you can open this because right now Blackboard is down. But here's the little picture. And I've got it laid out by colors. So you can kind of see who's going to authenticate what. And you get an idea of who has access to what, right? So, public users, everything you see in red is what the general public can access. The general public can access our three main pages, Home, About Me, and Contact Me. Which, of course, right? You want them to be able to know more about you. You want to give them impact with your homepage, make it super presentable and grab their attention. And your Contact Me gives them the details they need in order to contact you. You don't necessarily want to force them to register just to contact you. You don't want a potential employer to have to register because they will leave the site. They won't register, right? But you want them to be able to contact you. Next are login and register, right? So that makes sense. You aren't logged in, so you need to be able to log in. You wouldn't want to put that behind a gateway or there'd be no way for you to access the site, right? And register, obviously you want new users to register to your site. So both of those have to be public. In addition to that, they have to be able to manage their session. That basically means that they need to be able to register and follow through this path. They need to be able to log in and follow through this path. Meaning they need to be able to authenticate, or they need to be able to fire off our new form and create show, so on and so forth. However, when that user is finally in, they do not need access to those other things, right? That's why they turn purple. Purple basically means only the user with the purple status can actually access this stuff while they are logged in, which makes sense that only an administrator would have that level to create new users while logged in, to view all the users while logged in, and to show users while logged in, right? They're the only ones that should be allowed that capability. The general user, however, has the access to their profile, so they can go see themselves. They'll also be able to edit their profile, which makes sense, right? And they can log in. I mean, you can't hold them hostage, right? They have to be able to log in. So the general public can access all the public areas like Home, About Me, and Contact Me. And you'll notice they can access login, register, authenticate, and managing sessions. Authenticate is actually just a pure script and doesn't contain any actual HTML. So authenticate will just be a PHP script that when you click submit on the login, it goes there and authenticates you and then kicks you back to a different page. Authorized users can access anything a public user can access, right? So they can still access Home, About, and Contact. There's no difference there. As well as viewing their profile page. Admin users can do everything. Absolutely everything you can possibly do, the admin user can do. However, we will make it so they can't delete themselves. That's about the only thing they won't be allowed to do. Cool, which leads us into registering a new user. So, the idea is in the next 45 minutes, oh, it's Chris Naismith. In the next 45 minutes, we are going to build a user form. And in that user form, we're going to make it so that you can submit it to our create page, and we'll just look at the contents. And then after that, we'll end class, because that's right where Wednesday ended up, and I will troubleshoot whatever issues you guys may have. So let's give her a whirl. Let's close out all of our stuff here. and we're going to go to users, and we're going to go to new.php. Stop plugging. So new.php is the view that our user is going to see. And if you were to navigate there right now, if we open up our browser and go to new.php, so go to users. Let's make this normal size. I'm going to go to users, create a new user, right? You will see that there's nothing there right now. We don't have a form. Now, the good news is it's not an HTML file. We are not going to create a form. I have the form already created for you. We're just going to plug it in and add the details we need to plug in, right? So, but we're going to do it PHP style because new and edit use the same form. So there is absolutely no reason to create two forms, one for each view, when it's exactly the same anyways. It makes more sense for us to make it that when you go to the edit one, that we pre-populate it for you. And not only will we populate it for you, we'll also adjust the action so it points to update instead of create. But don't worry about that quite yet. Right now, we're just going to make it super simple. Let's jump over to the new page and find out why we can't see our form. So if we scroll down, you're going to see, oh, there it is, line 25, step 1, include the form partial. So we have included, I don't know how many files at this point. I want you to give that a go yourselves first. Take 5 minutes here and try to include the form partial. Once you have successfully done so, I'd like you to jump over to Slack and tell me in the Comp 1006 channel how you did it. Just write the code line. That's it. How you included the form. So go ahead and give it a shot. Try to figure out how you include the form, and then post the line of code you wrote inside the Slack channel. And if you look at the page, there's lots of examples on the page that you could follow in order to figure this out. So you're including the form. There's only one file in our system that has the form in it. Include ones, fruit, users. Who's Harmon? Awesome. Yep, that's exactly what we need. I'm going to make this obscure, at least for a few. Turn, you silly thing. Oh. All right, I'll pull it up on my phone instead. Oh, new user's typing. Where's G1? Awesome. Exactly what you want. Now you do have a choice between include or include once. Include will include the file as many times as you type that line. Include once will only ever include it one time on that particular file that you're including into. What about this thing bounces? There's another user typing. Where's Yuming? Did you type it in? What's your question? Do you have to include the main bar now? Form. Form. Just form. And Yuming, that is correct. All right, I'll give it a type out, and then you guys can see how close you were. 3 people got it right. So it's going to be include or include once, doesn't matter. In this scenario, include works because we're only ever putting this line one time in the file. So include. And then inside, we write our path to our user's file, right? So we always include root because root gives us that root path, that C:/WAMP64/ blah, 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 right? It gives us the actual proper file path as an absolute path. Now, we can start off as if we were right in the root of our lesson 4 folder and give it the rest of the path. So the rest of the path, we put in quotes, /users/_form.php. And then that will include the form inside our page. For those of you that may have forgotten, include copies the contents of that file and pastes it right where we call it. Instantly. You cannot assign it off to a variable. Yes? You can use double quotes or single quotes, your choice. There is a slight performance benefit from single quotes over double quotes because single quotes requires the string to be interpreted in case there's variables in it. So single quotes will be a little faster, not noticeably though.
As we start the session, you have to end it.
Nope, you start it and you just leave it. The second the file changes, that session access closes out and you have to reopen it in the next file. We're going to talk about that too because if you've already got it open and then you try to open it again, it explodes. So we're going to look at a way to stop that. Yes, sessions will expire. I don't know what the default is, but that's set in Apache. Apache actually controls that part of it. There is a way in PHP to actually call a function and set the session expiry. That's a good question because when you're doing authentication and you're trying to create a secure application, it's not a bad idea to expire sessions that are 15 minutes or longer. What you can also do, what some people will do, is they'll actually port the data from the one session to a new session, and they do that every 5 minutes. So that your session key never stays the same. So if somebody does hack in the middle and hijack the session, they're only going to have that session for 5 minutes, and then it's done. Yeah. Yep.
As you said, like get is not secure.
Get and post are not invisible. You can actually see them in your network. Yep, you can totally see them in your network tab. Whereas session, you can't see. It's invisible to the user. Yeah.
But you can navigate to
With session, you can navigate to ABC. With get and post, you can't. Actually, with session, you can navigate to A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, G, right? You just keep going until you close the browser.
Are the cookies safe?
Are cookies safe? No. That's why we only use them for convenience. Because here's the problem with cookies. I can access the cookies that I have stored on a page, but so can any other cookie that's on that page. So if Facebook has added in their cookies to the page, they can access the cookies on the page as well. So no, cookies are not safe. So you have to be careful with cookies. Yeah. That gets kind of intricate when you start talking about how those people access cookies as well. Like say I have my Facebook feed on my page. I'm now opening up cookies that Facebook can now write to the page, and then they can access any cookies that are currently sitting on the page, and then see their values. Yeah, which can get insecure if you have other people's stuff on your page. Yeah, don't store insecure data on a cookie. Just follow the same principles as get and post when you're working with cookies as well. Yeah. All right, so now that you have that, you should be able to jump over to the browser and hit refresh. And you should see the form. Yes, Abhijit, that is exactly what I'm looking for. Cool. All right, so our form, super simple. First name, last name, email, password, and password. That's kind of goofy. That was supposed to be password confirmation. I mean, let's go fix that. Where do I fix that? What file do I need to open to fix that password issue? Form, exactly. So let's go ahead and open up form. I'll show you a cool trick. Hit Control P on your keyboard if you're in Visual Code, and this thing will fly out. And then just start to type the word form, and you'll see it show up, and then hit Enter to open it. So again, that was Control P. Start typing the name of the file, form, and hit Enter, and it opens immediately. Very fast way to move through your application. All right, so this is our form. Let's go fix the problem that's immediate right now. We'll scroll down, scrolling. Keep that body scrolling. Down here at the bottom on line 36, you'll see the label for password confirmation, and it just says password. Let's change that so it says password confirmation and save it. So that's what it should say. For those of you that forget, type is basically what it says the field is. Type password is what makes it show up as little dots when you go to type in a password. So that's cool. We have our label, password confirmation. If we jump back to our browser and hit Control R, we'll see that it's changed to password confirmation. Yes. All right, let's fill out the form. Why not, right? I'll type in my name. My name is Sean. Last name is McKinnon. Sean.mckinnon@georgiancollege.ca. Password is ASDF. Password confirmation is ASDF. Hey, my thing is not working. That sucks. However, if I click submit, I get a little question mark at the top, and that's it. Nothing goes anywhere. We don't see any data. Nothing's happening. And the reason is because we haven't given it an action, so it doesn't know where to go. And we haven't given it a method, so it's immediately using get, which is the reason why it's trying to add it into the URL. So we need to fix that, which turns out is step 1 of our process anyways. Step 1, add the action and HTTP method to the form attributes. So let's do that. We're going to add action equals, and then we'll leave it empty for a minute, and then we'll do method equals post. Now the action is a path. It's not a directory, so we don't use the same type of stuff that we do with includes. We have to give it a path. Treat it more like an anchor link, right? So we're going to do that base path thing first. Base path. That will set the root of our path, right? And now I'm ready to do yes. You have to use, well,
In HTML, we don't need.
in HTML you definitely do. Yeah, because so when you submit, what form actually does is it surrounds all of your input fields. When you click submit, it takes all of the data from your input fields, turns them into keys and values, and then submits that whole block off to the server. So in PHP, you have to have that. In JavaScript, it's a little different. Because JavaScript, you don't necessarily need the form action. You can get away with just grabbing all of your input fields, storing them, and then using Ajax to send them off to your server. Yeah, that's fine. However, what I will say is the WC3 validator, if you have a bunch of forms and you don't have them wrapped in a form tag, it will warn you and tell you that it's an error. It doesn't actually say it. Oh, that's super weird. Yeah, it used to. I guess it doesn't anymore. That makes sense. But if you want them sent as one block to a PHP server or to a Ruby server or any type of server like that, you have to run it. Otherwise, they won't get added to the post. No worries. Good question, though. All right, now I'm ready to add my slash. So slash users, slash, and where am I sending my form to? Remember way at the beginning of the class? What's that? I heard somebody say it. Create, yeah. Create PHP. That's where we're sending it to. The form is the view. Create.php is the thing that's going to process that form for us. All right, so now that we've got that in place, now if we submit, our form is actually going to take our content and send it off to create.php for us. However, we have a problem. Each of our form items, our inputs, are missing a super important attribute. And it would wind up resulting in our host Superglobal being actually empty because it would be missing all of its keys. Does anybody know, looking at that, remembering your HTML class, what attribute is missing from this input tag, from all of the input tags? Yes. Who said name? Yes, name. Name is the thing it's missing. ID doesn't help the server. The server doesn't care about ID. We use ID more as a unique identifier if we're going to do something with JavaScript. But we need name in order for the server to be able to associate the input's value with the field. So, go ahead and type name equals first name, and do that for all the other inputs. So name equals first name. Go to last name, do the same thing. Name equals last name. Same with email. Name, equals email. And the password, name equals password. And then last but not least, the password confirmation, which is name equals password confirmation. Write it exactly the same way as you see the ID is written. Okay? You can even be so cheeky as to copy all of the ID ones and then create a 5-cursor multi-select and paste them all in place, which is what I did with my Wednesday class. But it got confusing. And then once you've done that, you're ready to submit the form. Oh, are we? Are we ready to submit the form? Yeah, we're ready to submit the form. I mean, we've got an action. We've got a post. We have our name fields, our name attributes. So we've done all that. Step 3 can't happen yet. Step 4 can't happen. Well, step 4 can happen, but we're not going to do it yet. We'll do it later. So I mean, we're ready. That's it. That form is done like dinner. So if we jump over to the browser, don't forget to refresh so that the name field's taken place. All right. Now you can go ahead and type out the form. I'm going to go Sean McKinnon, Sean.Georgian. Oh, look at that. See that fun little piece of JavaScript that sticks out? I'm going to just write ASDF, ASDF. You guys are a tough audience. I spent a total of 5 minutes making it do that. Whatever. Yeah. You put your hand up. You have an issue? Can you just hold for 1 second? All right, so when you hit post or when you hit submit, it's going to the create.php page, but it's just blank, right? Because we don't have any actual PHP there. Let's go create a very tiny little bit of PHP. We're not going to write out the actual handler because it's too late. So just open create.php. And I've already got some code in there for us. I've got our config file in there, and I've got our connect.php. And there's a create message system, so we'll just ignore that for now. But go ahead and put your cursor on line 7. And what we'll do is we'll just look at the contents of the Superglobal post. We'll just see what's inside of it. Does anybody remember how to, I'll even give you the key word here, dump the contents of that variable? How do we dump the contents of that variable? Does anybody remember? Var dump, exactly. Var dump, and we'll put $_post in there. Make sure you type it in capitals. And then when you refresh your create.php page, you will see the post values you typed in. And the first thing you're likely going to notice is that your password is in raw text. And you can see its value. Those little dots mean diddly squat. All right. So once you typed var dump post, Alt-tab into your browser, hit Control-R. It's going to say continue. Say continue. Don't save it. And there you go. My super secretive password is ASDF. Because those are the first 4 letters on my left hand. Easy peasy. Our next step is to take all of that information and create a brand new user if they don't exist, because we only want to create unique users. So we want to make sure they don't exist. We want to make sure their password doesn't go into our databases ASDF, right? That we're not target. We want to make sure we put passwords in hashed. So we'll hash this password. What else are we going to do? We're going to create an avatar and store it for them. We're going to create a default role for them, so that there'll be a default user, but I'll show you how to override that role so that you can go in and actually change the role so you can be an administrator of your own database. We'll validate all this information, because we should. We should never take what the user enters as being okay. We should always assume the user is a malicious bastard and we need to validate their code. So what we'll do is we'll go through and we'll sanitize all the strings. So the names, the email addresses. We'll validate that it is an email. There's actually a helpful little function inside PHP to do that. We can sanitize all of those, which means we'll strip out any like little angle brackets or any type of script tags so that they don't do cross-site scripting by injecting JavaScript into our database. And then, like I said, we'll hash the password. So we'll do that next week, first thing. Second we get here, we'll open up lesson 4, and that'll be our first step, is to finish out this page. For the rest of the afternoon, I can help you if you have errors. I can also help you if you have any project issues or have any project discussions you need to have. All right? Any questions about any of the stuff we just learned? No?
Is there a difference between using